So you want to make something unique, something that stands out in the history of photography. But to do that, you need to know where photography has been and where it is going. At this point, it seems like everything that can be created has been created. But I'd argue that at any point in the lifespan of any art form, it can feel like that. Nonetheless, someone comes along with something new that completely changes how we think about the potential of what can be done. These changes typically come through breaking rules, but to break rules, you have to know what they are first. And to know where something is going, you have to know where it's been. To understand where photography has been, The Photographer's Eye by John Zarkowski is a great place to start. But then you might ask why you should trust what Zarkowski had to say. Well, John Zarkowski was the curator of the Department of Photography for nearly 30 years at MoMA, where he helped promote photography of some of the most well-known street photographers ever through exhibitions he held of their work. Names like Robert Frank, Walker Evans, Gary Winogrand, Lee Freelander, William Eggleston, and Dion Arbus, among many others. Being aware of the quality of their work and having the wherewithal to put it on display should be more than enough evidence to make it abundantly clear that his ideas are worth studying. Beyond all that, he was a pretty highly regarded photographer in his own right, and a graduate of art history, who climbed his way up the ladder of quality museums to eventually reach his standing at MoMA. His book, The Photographer's Eye, is a collection of 200 images split into 5 categories that are meant as, according to the book's introduction, an investigation of what photographs look like and why they look that way. It is concerned with photographic style and with photographic tradition, with the sense of possibilities that a photographer today takes to his work. In this video, I'm going to do my best to break down the 5 categories of this book into more digestible portions, display a majority if not all of the 200 photos presented in the book, and make some suggestions to open the floor to discussion about where photography is going. Since with the advent of AI and its rapid acceleration, it's clear to me that many of us don't know where photography is going to be in the next 5 to 10 years. And for me, that's something of great concern. This is Street Smarts Volume 33, John Zarkowski. This video is brought to you by Dehancer Film Emulation. The first of Zarkowski's arguments that several would argue against is that art like painting is made, and photography stands in contrast to those arts because, according to Zarkowski, photos are taken. His belief as a result of the taken mindset is that the emotions and meaning brought out of us by traditional art forms were unable to be felt in the same way through new forms of art. So any art that was not made through traditional means needs to invoke those emotions in new and different ways, if they want to conjure up the same feelings brought on by the art forms that he felt were made. To understand this feeling in a similar way, my thought was to compare it to the current feelings many of us have about AI art, which as far as I can tell, is hated by anyone who considers themselves a true artist. This feeling, if not the exact same, was potentially similar to how anyone who had spent their lives perfecting their craft at painting portraits must have felt when cameras came along, and in many cases, took their jobs. In trying to find these emotions for new artistic mediums, Zarkowski wrote, "These new ways might be found by men who could abandon their allegiance to traditional pictorial standards, or by the artistically ignorant who had no allegiances to break," which sounds eerily similar to statements made by those who hate AI art. The piece goes on to explain how new artistic crafts always go on to spark a litany of new jobs. However, those new jobs grow extensively in popularity and result in many jobs being abandoned. Video and photography, as well as many other digital arts, have reshaped the world as a byproduct of social media in recent years. This has also brought financial success to tons of people with a wide variety of skill levels in these emerging industries. In reference to the photographs in this book that Zarkowski believes explain the phenomenon, as a huge wave of new jobs were brought on by photography in his time that also reshaped the world of his day. He says they were the byproduct of accident, improvisation, misunderstanding, and empirical experiment. But whether produced by art or by luck, each picture was part of a massive assault on our traditional habits of seeing. And that these photographers took so many of these photos without ever pausing to ask themselves, is this or that artistic? What is needed to elicit these feelings in photography? And what is or is not actually art in the form of photography? This is what Zarkowski looked to answer through the following 5 categories. The first of the 5 categories that the photographer's eye focuses on is called the thing itself. In this section, Zarkowski breaks down the internal monologue every photographer deals with in terms of the fact that they are always photographing a real thing. But in that comes the skill of noticing the subtle artistic flares that are all around us at any given moment. When we consider how everything in our environment comes together, it takes high levels of thought and intelligence to see this, understand it, and interact with it through the medium of photography. Understanding this means that, in Zarkowski's words, the subject and the picture were not the same thing, although they would afterwards seem so. It was the photographer's problem to see not simply the reality before him, but the still invisible picture, and to make his choices in terms of the latter. This video is brought to you by Dehancer Film Emulation, a plugin to help photographers and videographers achieve the look of film through digital means within the following software. For more information on how Dehancer can help you achieve the look of film on your frames by adding authentic and tested looks, compression, grain, halation, bloom, and more, check the link in the description. The other main facet observed in the thing itself is how photography does or does not relay the absolute truth about whatever is being photographed. In Zarkowski's time, it was seen as a tool that presented something that other art forms could not, in regard to this truth, because of the detailed representations of whatever was being captured. Today, this truth is a bit more elusive. Even though photos have always been manipulated, now, in many instances, they are manipulated in ways that wouldn't have been possible 60 years ago, so that truth of the thing itself no longer exists. Even in simple photos of simple things, straight/documentary type photography does still exist, but we move further and further into a realm where anything and everything is questioned for its validity, so far that it's difficult to comprehend any new art form could come along that gets us closer to that truth. The truth seeming to be something we are continuously moving away from. In the opening of this chapter, Zarkowski writes, "More convincingly than any other kind of picture, a photograph evokes a tangible presence of reality. Its most fundamental use, and its broadcast acceptance, has been as a substitute for the subject itself, a simpler, more permanent, more clearly visible version of the plain fact. Our faith in the thrush of photography rests in our belief that the lens is impartial, and will draw the subject as it is, neither nobler nor meaner. This faith may be naive and illusory, for though the lens draws the subject, the photographer defines it, but it persists. The photographer's vision convinces us to the degree that the photographer hides his hands." The images Zarkowski puts on display to drive this point home by showing landscapes, portraits, and objects as representing exactly what they are, drive home all of the points of fear that all artists have right now in terms of where AI is going, and how horrifying it will be when we can't separate truth from lies in any medium, and the potential of a future where everything we consume artistically is complete fiction that only represents what is generated, and not any real thing itself. In this section, Zarkowski explains his feelings about a commonly expressed idea that painting moved in new directions as a response to photography's ability to tell the absolute truth about anything that was being photographed. He argued that this doesn't really make sense, because major events like the Civil War and World War II both have countless photos capturing events that require massive captions for anyone viewing them to truly understand what is going on. This, however, works in the photographer's favor, to elicit greater meaning to things that are often seen as trivial. In Zarkowski's words, the compelling clarity with which a photograph captured the trivial suggested that the subject had never before been properly seen, that it was in fact perhaps not trivial, but filled with undiscovered meaning. If photographs could not be read as stories, they could be read as symbols. Through studying the photographers I have so far on this channel, I think it's these deeper connections that make photography projects much more meaningful, especially in the form of books that revolve around one single type of subject matter. But that's only the case for those who want to see photography as art, and interact with it with those deeper meanings. The problem with all of this is that those deeper connotations are easily written off as BS by anyone not wanting to view photography as art, and that these ideas are just made up to inflate the importance of any set of images. Revealing this undiscovered meaning, to use Zarkowski's term, makes the entire art of photography more compelling, and it's something that has been largely lost on social media, where the captions are heavily ignored, because they are more often than not a hashtag-filled wasteland. The frame is the third topic covered in Zarkowski's book. He talks about the frame in terms of its size, what's in it, and the relationship of the subject that don't necessarily exist in the real world outside of the frame. and where the frame ends up being viewed as an aspect of photography that has always changed and evolved. Now vertical frames for social media content, whether video or photography, have largely taken over, leaving some to abandon horizontal frames entirely or never interact with them in the first place. To sum this up, Zarkowski states, "The central act of photography, the act of choosing and eliminating, forces a concentration on the picture's edge, the line that separates in from out, and on the shapes that are created by it. The pure economics of printing negatives in the early days of photography, when enlargement was impossible, made filling the frame a desirable way to shoot for economic reasons. Any kind of cropping after the fact of printing would not have been cost-effective. Framing is clearly something all of us consider whenever we compose a shot. But where are the limitations of aspect ratios headed? I prefer more cinematic aspect ratios for my videos, and I'm all over the map when it comes to framing my photos. Different subjects and angles call for different ratios. It's all about whatever ratio gives the image the best balance in my opinion. But social media has forced certain ratios to really dominate the photographic space. With the advent of VR and 360 cameras, the ways we engage with photography in the future could dramatically change if it's not already happening. Zarkowski describes photography as having an inability to truly capture anything instantaneously, because no matter how fast the shutter speed is, some amount of time still elapses, even if it's only a fraction of a second. In regard to past, present, and future trends in photography, he also looks at how images that captured any kind of motion blur were seen as failed photographs. Anyone deep in photography at this present moment knows how hype motion has become. So what will the future say about what is and is not a failure or a success of photography? Will current evolutions in technology make photography's story of failure and success null and void? You could clearly speculate here, any direction, about how motion will be considered in photography going forward. But it's another interesting aspect to look at in terms of the mentality that everything has been done, and I think it offers the most potential for more experimentation, as has been proven time and time again. Whether it's the Aribari Bokeh style of Provoke that I'm clearly obsessed with if you watched anything else on this channel, or the manipulation of creating completely empty spaces from extremely long exposures like the work of Yutaka Takanashi, the movie theater blank screens that capture entire movies in one frame that were created by Sugimoto, or the Silent World project from Paris-based Lucien Simon. There are endless other examples of the tricks that can create unique results with the use of long exposures, and I'm sure other new ones will show their face eventually. On the other end of the spectrum is an obsession with photographers to capture the smallest amount of time possible. Zarkowski puts it like this: immobilizing these thin slices of time has been a source of continued fascination for the photographer, and while pursuing this experiment, he discovered something else. He discovered that there's a pleasure and a beauty in this fragmenting of time that had little to do with what was happening. It had to do, rather, with seeing the momentary patterning of lines and shapes that had been previously concealed within the flux of movement. Cartier-Bresson defined his commitment to this new beauty with the phrase "the decisive moment." But the phrase has been misunderstood. The thing that happens at the decisive moment is not a dramatic climax, but a visual one. The result is not a story, but a picture. Zarkowski more or less talks about how photography has influenced itself and other mediums to go further and push perspectives of what art truly is. Because photography started in a completely understandable place of trying to replicate what was seen in the real world and has been taken to infinitely strange places ever since. From my current vantage point, I see a world where photography is more popular than ever, and the potential for even more infinitely strange and unique ideas is possible. But many of those thoughts, those concepts, and those ideas aren't even being flirted with. The temptations of clout that come from the constant perpetuation of what is trending at any given moment is stifling creativity, and has me worried about what is to come next. The goal more than anything with this channel is to find others veering off the path of least resistance into the unknown in order to find their own unique artistic voice, and to create something that has truly never been seen before. In terms of the grand scheme of all things photography related, Zarkowski sums up where it has been and where it is going through the quote, "Like an organism, photography was born whole. It is in our progressive discovery of it that its history lies." Thanks to Dehancer for sponsoring this video. If you want to know how to achieve a film look of your own on your digital photo and video, check the link in the description. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and until next time, keep developing.